Madam or Mr. President. I can't tell which currently.
The senator from Tennessee.
Madam President, thank you. I rise today to speak about the omnibus bill that we're going to be either voting on later today or tomorrow. And I just want to say I came to the United States Senate almost 12 years ago. I've got nine months left in my term. I told folks back home I couldn't imagine serving more than 2 terms, and yet it's been an incredible privilege to be here. And when I ran concerned about our nation's fiscal issues, and ran on the combination of pro-growth tax reform and entitlement reform and dealing with the tremendous deficits that our country has, and really thought we would do something about it. We had the financial crisis that took place back in 2007, 8, 9. It was building in 7, occurred in 8. We dealt with much of it in 2009. And I remember talking to people around our country then, not just about the financial crisis, but about the tremendous deficits that our nation was creating. And was still hopeful in my first term that we would rise to the occasion and actually deal with the fiscal issues that are going to haunt these young people who are our pages sitting before me. We have $21 trillion in debt today, and over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities with our long-term programs, our mandatory spending programs. So during that period of time, during near the end of my first term, I kept saying to people around the country, there's no question that the United States Senate and House, with leadership from the executive branch, will deal with this fiscal issue. Madam President, I'm convinced today that that is not going to happen until there's a crisis in our nation. I'm absolutely, let me say it one more time, without extreme leadership at the very top, I do not think we will deal with this issue until there's a crisis, because I just don't see the will here to do the things that need to be done. During December, we had a debate on the pro-growth tax reform side of this, and I think it's well documented. I had concerns about it. As a matter of fact, when the bill came through the Senate, I voted against it. I continued to work with some of my counterparts on the Democratic side, Chris Coons and others, and the White House to see if there was some way to potentially alter the bill so that if growth projections didn't achieve what we thought they might be, that we had some way of ensuring that we would not have deficits. At the end of the day, when it came back through, I supported it. Pro-growth tax reform, again, being one of those things that I ran on back in 2006. Madam President, what concerns me is today before us, or maybe tomorrow, we've got a 2,232 page omnibus bill before us that sets the base in spending that will be about $2 trillion in deficit spending over the next 10 years. By the way, that doesn't include some of the supplemental items. I'm talking about just the baseline in spending. And I think everyone knows, like you, I'm a very strong supporter of our men and women in uniform. And no doubt, we all understand the defense numbers in this bill are way beyond even what the executive branch had asked for. Somehow in these negotiations, we've ended up over a 2-year period with an average increase in base spending of about $150 billion. When you multiply that times 10, that's $1.5 trillion. You know there's going to be increases over that 10-year period. And then if you look at the interest on the debt that it's going to create, it's about a $2 trillion. We're voting on a bill tonight or tomorrow that's going to add, there's no question, a minimum of $2 trillion in deficits over the next 10 years. What was fascinating during the month of December when we were dealing, let me stop for a second. Let me just go down the road. There's a lot of discussions about the fact that maybe the Republican Party has lost its soul. A lot of discussions about that around the country, that maybe the Republican Party has lost its soul. I will say that for the Republican Party to have the presidency, and for the Republican Party to have the Senate, for the Republican Party to have the House of Representatives. And for us to be passing a bill today, obviously it couldn't happen without us. We control the agenda here. For us to be in a situation where we're getting ready to pass a bill that adds $2 trillion in deficits over the next 10 years, or sets the stage for that by passing the first 2 years with a huge increase in base spending with no offsets to speak of, does have to be a wake-up call to people as to whether that's the case. I mean, I can't imagine, for instance, had the 2016 election gone a different way and we had a Democratic president and we controlled the House and Senate, I cannot imagine us being in a situation where we would vote tonight or tomorrow for a bill that is going to add $2 trillion in debt without offsets. Matter of fact, I can just tell you absolutely that would not be the case. And so here we are. Look, there's going to be all kinds of things in this bill that people don't even know about. It's just human nature. It's human nature when you have the pen in your hand and you're working in a back room someplace, and I don't criticize back rooms. That's how these bills get written. But people do things to benefit themselves. I mean, they just do. That's the way it works. And so I don't even want to speak to that. That'll be something I hope the media will speak to over the next 2 or 3 weeks. When we find in these 2,232 pages that no one has read, when we find the things in this bill that are going to be egregious to the American people, highly egregious, and I hope people will find them, and I hope the media will report them, and I know that they are in there. I just don't know what they are yet because the bill has just been produced. That's of concern, but what's of great concern to me is the fact that we've made no attempt whatsoever to create any kind of offsets, no attempt whatsoever to try to solve our fiscal issues, and just together, Republicans and Democrats, are running off the cliff, passing a bill. Now, let me speak to my Democratic friends. I'm criticizing Republicans, as I should, with this piece of legislation where we control the executive branch, we control both houses of Congress, and we're getting ready to pass a bill that will add $2 trillion for these young people to pay for down the road, which will compound. We have $20 trillion and $21 trillion in debt today, not to speak of the $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. My Democrat friends raised unmitigated HELL over the tax bill that was going to potentially create some deficits if growth projections didn't occur. I have not heard a word from them. Not a word. Not a word about the fact that there's no question we're adding $2 trillion in debt here. No question. I mean, this is money gone, down the tube, out the door. No way to pay for it. I haven't heard a word from them. Not a word. And my friends in the media, which just were beside themselves in December. I mean, just the world was going to come to an end if the growth projections that were laid out didn't occur, and the deficits that might be created by this tax bill if we didn't have the growth were just beside themselves. I have not heard a word from them. It's amazing. Somehow or another, spending more money than we have is different than hoping to create pro-growth tax reform. So, Madam President, let me just say this. I'm optimistic about our future. I see young people around our country that are just so impressive. I go to schools, I go to colleges, I see people in town hall meetings and restaurants, at the grocery store and other places, and I could not be more upbeat about the generation of people who are coming after us, who care about others, who care about the future, who are engaged in issues. We'll have a big crowd of people up here this weekend caring about a particular issue that they should care about. But Madam President, I could not be more discouraged about where we are today with our adult leadership here in Congress and at the White House. This is one of the most grotesque pieces of legislation I can remember. One of the best votes I ever made was the Budget Control Act. And it was criticized, but It kept domestic and discretionary spending on a level. We should have done the rest of it. The rest of it was people getting together to solve our long-term problems. That didn't happen. We created the sequester, and I know that's built some of the pressure that leads us to where this bill is today. But this is a grotesque piece of legislation. Grotesque that we would pass a piece of legislation that would set the standard for $2 trillion in deficit spending not offset. I'm discouraged. I'm discouraged about where we are today. I'm discouraged about the fact that we continue to be engaged in generational theft, my generation. We won't deal with mandatory spending that benefits my generation. It's to these young people sitting in front of me, we're engaged right now in generational theft because we are transferring from you to us your future resources because we don't have the courage or the will to deal with issues. And by the way, unfortunately, the American people are not there. The American people do not care about this issue because we're living fat and happy today, and because the crisis has not yet occurred, and because we can slough it off on you and keep ourselves from making these tough decisions. By the way, these tough decisions, you see, they play themselves out in the polls because people get angry about the fact that we need to be responsible, that we need to make sure that you guys are not going to pay these huge tabs. By the way, your standard of living, when we pass this bill, your standard of living will be diminished when you go on to college and graduate and start working in your jobs. Just know that what we're getting ready to do tonight or tomorrow is going to diminish your standard of living because we're going to pass a huge bill unpaid for that you're going to pay for and your children are going to pay for. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing because we don't have the will as a body to say, okay, if we're going to spend this additional money, what is it we're going to cut over here? What are we going to do relative to the fact that right now Medicare recipients take about 3 times out of the program what they put in? What are we going to do about that? Well, see, we're going to do nothing about it because that's unpopular. And people don't want to hear the truth about these things. Instead, what they'd rather do is say, well, let's worry about that down the road. But let me tell you who's going to be worrying about it. You're going to be worrying about it. And I hope after you've been here, and I know you've seen some outstanding people. I've served with outstanding people in this body. I really do. Intelligent, hardworking people. I really do. It's been a great privilege. But what you're going to see tonight and tomorrow, you're going to see a bunch of hardworking people pass a piece of legislation that's going to make your lives and your kids' lives worse. With that, Mr. President, Madam President, let me say I will not support this piece of legislation. And I know it's going to pass overwhelmingly because there's too much in it to make people happy for the moment. But let me just say, down the road, the American people are going to be very unhappy with our lack of responsibility. And not only do I question the soul of my own party, I question the soul of the other party. And I wonder where the media is and why they're not outcrying over what we're getting ready to do. With that, I yield the floor.